My name is Robert Smith. I am a reporter with Planet Money. I have been a radio man, I guess I would say, because I still don't fully call myself a journalist. I guess if you do it long enough, but you know, I never went to school for it. I never learned how to do it in print. Can't spell. My fingers get tired. So in other words, I was perfect for radio. Like you have to write 7 good sentences, and like that's a good day in radio. Like there are 7 awesome sentences. And I have started at the local level. I've worked all up and down the west coast of the continental United States, Portland, Seattle, LA. Worked in Salt Lake City for a long time, of which today reminds me of a beautiful blue sky day. And moved to New York City to be a general assignment reporter there. And there's no better job than being a general assignment reporter in New York City because you're just there, like waiting for crazy stuff to happen. And when it does happen, they want it pretty fast. One of the disadvantages to being on the East Coast is because our news shows start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and people on the West Coast have barely gotten up at that time. Most of the news you hear comes from people on the East Coast or in Europe where you have enough time to put together an actual piece for it. You know, they expect you to turn around things quickly. And so for many years, I was assigned not just breaking news, which I don't know how many of you are out there covering things routinely, but breaking news is the easiest thing in the world. Because in the breaking news, the plane goes down, the mayor resigns, hurricane comes in. For breaking news, it's really, really easy. So I'm not even going to talk about it today. For breaking news, you just go to the place it's happening, and you start to describe what you see. And you talk to people, and you tell people what other people say, and you say, how do I know this information? And then in 15 minutes, you do it again and again. And breaking news is stressful, and it's a logistical challenge, but don't spend any time worrying about breaking news, because when it happens, you're going to open your cell phone, and you're just going to start talking. You're going to describe what it is you see right in front of your eyes, what you know and what you don't know. And try not to fake things that you do know, as we can tell from what's happening in Boston the last few days. But it's hard. Like it's hard because you're live, somebody's asking you questions, and you want to answer. You want to be like, well, you know, I kind of think this. And so, breaking news, just describe it. The kind of deadline stuff I'm talking about here is the curse of the journalism profession, which is it's an assignment that they want in a quick period of time, but it's not necessarily urgent. You have to do some work to it. You have to find the right people. You have to have the right structure for it. You have to give them something entertaining. They want a feature that's fun and entertaining. And they tell me this in the morning at 9 o'clock. It's got to be fun. It's got to be entertaining. It's got to be smart. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. And it has to be there by 4 o'clock. So the things I want to talk about today were the ways in which I now approach those kind of deadline stories. And before I begin, I wanted to see who here does radio or audio-like product. There's some people. Video, is there people who specialize in video? Is this old-fashioned of me to ask? Who does it all? Who's the multimedia journalist, the feature? And who's, yeah, there you go. And who does print? So there's some, oh, I mean, you all do print in addition. Are there people here who do print who don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about a shotgun mic or an actuality or a sound or some people? All right, that's fine. This will be entertaining for you. But I asked for an important reason, and it has nothing to do with the equipment. It has to do with a particular problem that we as audio journalists have, and video is actually the same way. Which is, the nice thing about print is you can write something, and the people who want to read it will read it. And the people who don't want to read it will skip it. And although we have, of course, on-demand audio, most of what we do is a linear medium. So once I start talking, if I bore people or offend them or say something wrong or generally just make people turn their radio off, they don't hear what I have to say. And more than that, they don't hear the next guy, my friend, who's coming on right after me. And so as a radio reporter, your goal is to get somebody from minute 0 to minute 4, whatever you're given. Yes, you have to give information. Yes, you have to be accurate. All those things are true. But the most important thing is to keep them listening, to keep them entertained, to keep people's ears on the radio. And there's no other choice because you're the only thing playing at that moment. And so I say this to the print people because you'll hear a lot of what I'm talking about in terms of story arcs and in terms of structure and movement. All this stuff is just because of the peculiarities of radio. If we just start to list off things that are happening, and I know print people don't do that, but if you just say, oh, you know, I'll just put all the important stuff at the top, the inverted pyramid, people will just stop listening somewhere around minute 2.5. Now, for a long time, what I would do when I had any sort of story was what I call the farmer approach to stories, which is you just start planting seeds everywhere. They give you an assignment and you go, I don't know, and you start to call people. You call the professor of something, you call someone at the city council, you just start calling people. And when you get them, you just ask them every question you have. You just start accumulating tape. You just start getting piles and piles of information. And you planted these seeds, and they're growing, and then come around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you harvest what you've gotten, cut down on the actualities, and you sit there, and you go, okay, this is what my seeds have yielded, and if you have this happen to you, you know you're a farmer. If you've ever sat there and gone, what should I use first? You're sitting there, you have a blank page, and you're like, I don't know. Should I use this cut, or this person, or this? If you don't know, then you have what I used to do, which was the farmer approach. I advocate now what I call the hunter approach. And I'm always afraid to say that in front of people who probably are actually hunters, as many are in Alaska. But for the hunter approach, you are not waiting for things to happen. You're not waiting for people to call you back. You're not waiting for magical, wonderful sound bites to appear. You in your head have imagined your story. You've imagined your prey, and you go out and you get it. It's an active way of looking at the news, of saying, I have very little time. I have 1 day to do this thing. What do I need? What am I hunting for, and where can I find it, and how do I kill it, and how do I drag it back? And it's true, but you know, when you're doing the key is when you're doing news, there's, especially in audio news, it feels like there's like these two different skill sets. You know, and one of them you're just collecting information, you're gathering, you're the probing researcher, no questions too stupid, like yeah, just keep talking, tell me all about it. And then you switch over, and all of a sudden you're the writer. You're the person who has to cut it down. You're the person with the keen critical mind. You're the one who says, no, this isn't important, this isn't important. And the longer the time you have, if you have a week to do it, then you should just, be a farmer. Just get all the tape you can and spend days going through it and figure out what you want. But if you have very little time, you need to be writing from the very beginning. There's no gathering moment and the writing moment. You start them at the same time. You are writing from the moment you get the assignment as you're getting the tape, and you're actually getting the tape to fit the writing that you're already doing in your head. And the thing you're hunting for, I'll start to play some examples here, but the thing you're hunting for primarily in radio, the thing that makes all these feature stories sing is movement. Is some sort of action. I mean, news is action. News is something actually happening. If you're lucky, you can go to where it's happening. If you're not lucky, you have to find the action. You have to find something that moves, that creates a story that sounds like something. I'm going to give two very short examples that are news spots. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the NPR system, at the top of the hour we do a newscast with 45-second spots in them. And then for the rest of the hour, they're longer, 3, 4, 5-minute features. So these are two spots, so 45 seconds, turn around super quick. But I like them because they're both common problems that we have as journalists, and they turn them into little tiny features. So the first one's from Tamara Keith, and she's a business reporter, now congressional reporter, but at the time business reporter. And once a month, the first Friday of every month, the unemployment statistics come out. And it's one of these curses because they're really important statistics, but they're just numbers. They're hard to report on. And so the typical report, I've done a million of these reports, the unemployment rate's out, it's 7.5%, they kind of did 198,000 jobs. Last month they created 128,000 jobs, so it seems like an improvement, and in fact they were forecasting 210,000 jobs, so it's a disappointment. Robert Smith, NPR News. Here's the thing, you're not gonna get fired for that. Like that's like, everyone's like, yeah, good numbers. But if you want to turn that into something more, you have to find story. You have to find people, you have to find action, something actually happening. So Tamara Keith, this is very short, probably the shortest kind of story you could tell, but that morning when the numbers came out, she did a spot about an actual person.
Annika Trotter had been out of work for 4 months when she got the call. A security company where she had applied for a job wanted her to come in for an interview. So she ironed her power dress and went over possible interview questions in her mind. And despite some butterflies, she says she aced it.
I got the job. Insert long sigh of relief.
Being unemployed had taken a financial and emotional toll on her young family.
I'm so glad to have work to look forward to again.
For Trotter and thousands of others, February was a good month. Tamara Keith, NPR News, Washington.
So 40 seconds long. The number would have been in the intro. I just didn't play that part. So the intro person said, the unemployment rate was 7.8%. Created some new jobs. But Tamara's goal was to just put a human face on it. Now it's just one story, but there's something that's really nice about this story that I really like. There's two things actually, and they're not factual things. They're storytelling things. So do you remember what she does when she's getting ready for her interview? Do you remember? Yeah, she irons her power dress. Like that's a totally useless piece of information for anybody. Especially since we didn't actually tell you the color of the dress or anything, but there's very little time, you're parsing each word. But by putting it in there, that's what made it a story. Because there's a bit of action, and it also shows you, instead of tells you, how eager this woman was. And the second thing, and it's such a minor little thing, but you'll notice that there's an actual pause in there of about 2 seconds. She's like, and I got the job. Insert sigh of relief here. Now, when you're a news reporter dealing with 40 seconds, you are tempted to cut out a 2-second pause with no information in it. Like seriously, I've done this where I'm going to talk faster. I've got to get more stuff in there. But that 2 seconds was one of the things that created this sense of anticipation. At the job, sigh of relief. You actually can feel the relief. It's a very smart storytelling move. So she in a very short period of time got some action because she planned it out and thought about it. I'm going to play another very short spot from Andrea Seabrook. Andrea Seabrook, it's the same sort of thing in that it's a subcommittee hearing. And we've all had to cover these kind of things in government. They're horribly boring. But she spotted a little bit of action in this story, and she was smart enough to make sure that the action's in there.
The Chinese dissident who recently fled house arrest spoke to members of the U.S. Congress today by telephone. NPR's Andrea Seabrook reports.
New Jersey Republican Chris Smith was holding an emergency session of the Congressional Executive Commission on China when the subject of the hearing, political dissident Chung Wang-chung, was reached by phone.
We just had an interesting and I think lively conversation. We're going to put him on the speaker.
A hearing witness held an iPhone up to the podium mic and translated.
I want to meet with the Secretary Clinton. I hope I can get more help from her. I also want to thank her face to face.
Chung Wang-chung is now seeking refuge in the United States. Andrea Seabrook, NPR News, Washington.
Now this also has moments in it that don't actually tell you anything. There's a long cut, there's not a long cut, but for whatever that was, 38 seconds, it seemed long, where there are people going do we have the thing here? Do we have to, there's this murmuring that people are getting ready, do we have a phone call? Pure storytelling scene set. If you wanted to just tell the facts, you could just be like, this dude called in, here's what he said. But she instead sets up sort of a classic, little tiny story. People are going along, living their everyday life. Something weird happens. This phone call comes in. People are like, what do we do with the phone call? And then there's a moment that's like the little storytelling moment. The power dress of this particular spot is when a hearing witness picks up an iPhone and moves it to the mic. Because what she's doing there is similar to the anticipation of the other one. She's saying, she's creating movement, she's describing it, and then you want to listen. Because the phone is there. And it's like you're in the hearing. Here's what this guy has to say. Little tiny thing. But those kind of moments, those action moments, and those moments of character and story, I mean, that's what you're looking for. That's the prey when you're a hunter. So the question is, if you're going to do this, what are you looking for? How do you plan this out? Like you could say, oh, they got lucky. She found a lucky woman. It was a lucky, hearing. Most of the stuff I cover is really dull or really boring, or I don't know what to do, or that sort of thing. Well, I'm going to tell you sort of the ways that I start to think about this. I think that you can make plans. Before you know anything about a story, I think that you can plan out how you're going to get action into it, how you're going to get character into it, how you're going to structure your whole story, really before you know almost anything about the story. The very basic, excuse me for a second, this is probably huge, very loud. The very basic thing that I do when I approach it like a quick deadline story is to think up a structure, rather than sit there with a bunch of tape and go, I don't know what's going to be first. Structure at its very basic is just a through line to the story, is a way that someone's going to get from the beginning to the end. A way to make sure that the beginning is different than the end, so that something happens, even if nothing actually happens, at least the structure changes. And an example of this is the most basic structure I use, and I use this all the time, is what I call the three-ring circus. And if I could write on this board, I would draw 3 circles. Very enlightening. But this, I listened to a bunch of stories early on, and I noticed that the stories that I liked the best had 3 distinct parts to them. I'm not just talking like, oh yeah, every story's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. But 3 very distinct parts. Before an event, during an event, after an event, with clear dividing lines between them. Or you visit a place, you leave the place, you return to the place. You go from one place to another place to another place. Or even in terms of Andrea Seabrook, her stories on Capitol Hill, rather than doing Democrats think this, Republicans think this. Democrats then say this, Republicans say this. Democrats say this, Republicans say this. She'll group them together. She'll be like, all right, I'm with the Democrats now. Here's what the Democrats say, here's what they're doing, here's their plan. Meanwhile, across the Capitol, in a meeting room, all of a sudden we've moved to a different place, the Republicans are moving. And the Republicans think this, the Republicans think, she's grouped them together, and then for the third one it might be, all right, so how is this going to play out? She goes to someplace else for how it's going to play out, or maybe uses an expert or something, but it's grouped them. And the magic thing about 3s, you'll hear me today talk about 3s and 5s and 7s, these weird prime numbers, is that there's kind of a magical thing that if you put 3 things together, it seems like a series. If you just have 2 parts to your story, it's like, well, there's this, and there's this, I don't know, good luck, folks. But for some reason, if there's this, and this, it's what you see in triptychs, it's what you see in basic storytelling, it's what you see in jokes. It's basically a joke, right? Set up, punchline. And so, even though this is the most basic form, it works really well for like a 4.5-minute story. 3 parts of a minute and a half each, let's say. And it also makes it really easy to plan a story because you can say from the very beginning, rather than just going to a place and planning on just having a bunch of stuff happen, now you can think, all right, I got to fill these 3 boxes. And I'm going to play a little bit of a story I did in New York City about the funeral, the memorial service for James Brown at the Apollo Theater. They brought his body back to the Apollo Theater because he did a famous album. The album that made him famous was James Brown Live at the Apollo Theater. And he, the thing about the story was that he was set to arrive at the theater at 1 p.m., his body. And all things considered, it was like, well, we want you to do a story on this, at 5 p.m. We'll put you in the second hour, the 5 o'clock show. And we want it to be fun, to capture the scene and all this stuff. And I'm just like, 1 o'clock, it's up in Harlem. So the first thing I do when approached with something like this is you start to do a lot of math. So 5 o'clock deadline. 5 o'clock deadline means that I need to send all the pieces, all things considered. They mix it for us. Sometimes we mix it in New York, but I've sent them all the pieces by 4. So they have an hour to deal with and put together. So if I'm going to send them all the pieces by 4, that means that I pretty much have to record 10 minutes to 4, my narration. It means that I have to edit the piece probably around 3:30, 3:20. That's when I have to sit down and actually do the edit with my editor on the phone. It takes me about an hour to write something like this, or at least I force myself to write it in an hour. So that means I have to be back in the studios by 2:20, let's say. The A train is an express train from Harlem, from 125th Street to 42nd Street. Takes about 20 minutes. So I have to leave the scene at 2 o'clock. So the memorial's at 1. I got to leave by 2. Like this is the outline here. Absolute discipline. And I have three holes to fill, 3 rings to fill. So the night before, I was just thinking about it. I thought, okay, here's what I'll do. I'll start with some sound from the Life of the Apollo album, so I'll have that sound with me. And I will go there early because I have very little time. So the first ring is going to be people who have gathered to see this. What's motivated them? What are they thinking? That sort of thing. Scene 2, I'm going to go into the memorial with the mourners. We're going to see the body. We're going to walk through there. We're going to hear some words, that sort of thing. And then I'm going to have a little scene outside after. How have people been affected by seeing this? Like, did it move them? Like, what was the source? So that's the plan. And the first part works out really well. Just play a little bit of this.
On now to the late James Brown. His career.
I'm going to fast forward just a tad bit. It's about a 4-minute story, but we're going to listen to this in segments. So there's just a little bit of intro where you hear the sound from Life of the Apollo. First ring is what I said, the Vox. People have gathered. 3 days after his death, James Brown is still Mr. Dynamite, the hardest working man in show business.
I saw him perform in 1972 and 1974.
You're at the Apollo.
Yes, I was in the front row.
Describe to me what that's like.
You really can't describe seeing James Brown at a concert, but he puts so much into making sure that his audience enjoys themselves. You understand what I'm saying? That it really has you in awe.
So someone in the crowd here has looks like an original copy of James Brown. Say it loud.
I'm black and I'm brown.
Check it out. Looks like this has been played a number of times.
Oh, yes, it has. And we enjoyed it, and we feel good when we play it. He was as important, I'd say, as Martin Luther King. You know what I mean? Saying I'm black and I'm proud is the musical equivalent of I Have a Dream.
Some people thought that this might be a somber, a sad day here.
Nah, this is happy day.
Why is it happy day?
Because it's a homecoming, not a funeral.
By the afternoon. So that's the first ring. Totally fun, captures the scene, lots of great people. But there's a sort of another level of planning. All planned out beforehand. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I planned this out. You sort of make assumptions, sort of hypotheses about the world. My hypothesis was that it was going to be a party. If I had gotten there and everybody's like somber, I would have just had to come up with another plan. But in fact, Margot Adler, who is like another New York City reporter, that morning she caught me listening to Live the Apollo album. I'm like, oh, I'm going to play this music and do this. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not going to be a party. It's going to be a somber occasion. I'm like, no, it's going to be a party. And she's like, somber occasion. It's going to be a party. And you'll hear me reference this later on. But the other thing that I was thinking, and this is how planning goes into tape like this, I didn't just stand there and go, oh, maybe I should talk to some people. I knew in my head it was going to sound exactly like this. I knew that there was no narration in this, that I'm going to put this stuff together. I'm going to make a montage. And if you plan for that, then you start to think in the field, what do I have to do to make that possible? Well, one of the first things you want to do is talk to both men and women. So the voices sound different. So I'm a man, woman, man. The other thing you hear me doing the transitions in the field. I mean, it's sort of a subtle thing, but it's like I don't normally do this when I just come out and reporting, where I say, oh, I see a woman over here with her, holding a copy of her James Brown album. I'm intentionally going, if I'm going to cut this together and I have very little time to do it, I'm going to start to make some of the transitions in the pieces. So I'm like, oh, I see a woman over here, she's holding an album, James Brown's Say It Loud, and of course, at this point, I think, oh, wait a minute, am I just going to say out loud, I'm black and I'm proud? Because I'm not black and proud, I'm not black. And so it's like, say it loud, and then I just put the microphone in front of her, and then she says, I'm black and I'm proud. And I'm like, yes. It just would have felt weird for a moment. So, you know, but you can see, I'm gathering information, but I'm writing the story as I'm there. And so, and then the third guy, he talks about him being like Martin Luther King, and you'll notice I'm miking myself, I'm asking questions. Because I just know that's going to save me time, rather than have to cut each cut and do the narration in between. I thought this out, I cut it together. So that part, very, very easy, very quick, easy to do. But then came the slight problem, which is, in my plan, I was going to go in, right? 1 o'clock, funeral. Well, James Brown's late for some funeral. Which apparently is not surprising. He was late for many performances. And the reporters are penned up. So the idea is like, all the reporters they made get in this pen and they're going to walk us through after like, some of the family members went through. So we're stuck in this pen. But I'm looking at my watch and it's just like, it's not going to happen. It's getting to be past 1, and I have to leave at 2. And they're like, well, it could be another half an hour, it could be another 45 minutes. So in my head, I have to revise this plan. Like the second ring is going through, actually seeing the memorial, which is what I said to cover. So instead, I decided it's just going to be the arrival. There's going to be sort of a little arrival scene. And all the people you hear, I'm stuck in the pen, so I'm like literally interviewing anyone I can reach, including this woman I see on this guy's shoulder. You know, I'm trying to reach over the pen to get them. I don't point this out in the piece, but you'll hear the second ring here.
Celebration filled 125th Street in front of the Apollo. Not only the diehard fans you just heard, Charles Robinson, Robin Eaton, Carlton Smith, and Ulysses Coleman, it seemed like everyone in Harlem stopped by just to take a look. People were dancing, selling t-shirts and James Brown bootlegs. Elsa Kendall got up on her boyfriend's shoulders to take in the scene.
Pandemonium, it's a whole lot of people out there. They're going to be late for school trying to see James Brown.
And then the godfather of soul himself showed up. The crowd went nuts as the casket was carried into the theater and onto the stage.
About an hour. So it's just a small section, but it creates a sense of movement. James Brown arrives, James Brown, James Brown. The music stops, and they carry him to the theater. Now at this point, I need my third ring. Now I desperately want to leave at this point because I got to get on the air. But I also know that I do the structure for a reason. Because if I just end it now, James Brown arrived, Robert Smith, NPR News. You're just like, well, what the hell? Like, what a tease, right? Like, you need a concluding thing. You know, 1, 2, 3. So I got out of the pen and I ran around the back of the theater. They told us that everyone's going to come out the back. And I just waited for the first guy I saw. And he was going to have to do it for me.
Later, the line started to come out the back of the theater. Now quiet, reverent. Carney Bragg says he walked by the casket of James Brown and was in awe.
He has a blue outfit on. His hair looks beautiful as always. And he looks very good. I'm a film director, so I know he looks very good.
So it looked like you were going to put on a show.
That's right.
What was the feeling in there? Out front, there's sort of a party going on. Inside,
It's very quiet. No one's saying anything.
Bragg says he was reminded of late nights listening to James Brown's Live at the Apollo album and singing along, please, please don't go. Robert Smith, NPR News, New York.
So the thing no one probably noticed, but pleased me enormously, is the song you hear at the very beginning is the first cut off of James Brown Live at the Apollo, and the last song happens to be the last cut off of James Brown Live at the Apollo. So it was just kind of, that was for my own benefit, but the other things in the story create a sense of movement. You feel as if you kind of experienced something, and you might not even notice the fact that you didn't actually experience the memorial, you know, because we have a guy afterwards. The story arc is completed, and it goes through time, before, during, after. It goes through space. I'm out in the street, I'm close to the entrance of the theater, I'm to the back of the theater. but it also moves emotionally. It's like happy, it's crazy, it peaks at a craziness, and then out back, there's no music, it's quiet, the guy's calm, he's talking about how quiet he is inside. And the song we use is a much more reflective and sad song. So and the important thing for what we're talking about here is the moment I got onto the subway, I knew what my cuts were because I had planned out the story. Of course, this guy was going to be the end. He's all I had. I had done a few extra interviews at the top just to get some good people, but I knew I was going to cut them together. It didn't really matter who it was. Like the scene was enough. I knew the woman on the shoulders was going to work. There's some little things I had to pick out, but I've saved myself an enormous amount of time because the structure's there, the tape is there because I made sure I got the tape, and then there's just a little bit of writing, and it's just pure descriptive writing. It was very easy to do and to mix. But it's all, you know, it's all thanks to planning. You know, I wish I was really a lucky person. It's just like, you've got great people. It's like, no, I knew the people I needed for the roles. You know, I knew what the kind of person I needed. If the top of the piece was going to be fun and this party scene, I was looking for the people who were fun and partying. I mean, I could have, you know, found people who were sad, I'm sure. I could have found this, but the diagnosis of the scene was that's the kind of person I needed. So that's what I could go for. I'm going to play, like, just very briefly part of one that shares a similar structure. This was a piece I wanted to do for a long time on sound trucks. On election day on the East Coast, they drive these trucks around with big speakers on the top saying, vote for so-and-so, vote for so-and-so. And I always just thought it was a perfect radio story. The problem was, when I suggested this, they said, oh, well, we want to go on election day. So, I don't know, I somehow pictured this was going to be like a sound-rich feature and I'd have all this time to do it. But they're like, no, just go in the morning, get the sound, and we'll put on All Things Considered. Which, as you can tell, is the curse. Being on the East Coast, is that All Things Considered. So I went out in the morning to Newark, New Jersey, where these things are big, and I did the same thing, same three-part structure. Only this time I thought, you just start to fantasize, like what would work on a soundtrack? You know, what would it work? And I always fall back on sort of a basic feature phenomenon, which is that you can basically approach a story as sort of a bystander would approach a story. Like, what is it? Just a reasonably intelligent person walking down the street. They see something, they're interested, they're drawn in, they learn more, they get inside the thing, inside whatever it is. Maybe they go, well, wait a minute, that is weird, and they sort of move into this world. And so the idea of the soundtrack was similar to James Brown, and then I'm going to start on the street. You're standing there, trucks come by, you hear them. You hear this sort of thing, the fact of the matter, right? The action. And then I'm going to chase down a truck, and I'm going to get in a truck, which none of them will call me back, so I end up sort of having a taxi cab take me around and chase the trucks until I could find one. And then the third part was going to be, all right, how do voters actually react to this? You know, does it work? You know, and at this point, what was kind of a scary endeavor, having to go to a different state, to New Jersey, to do this and to get back in time to file for All Things Considered, becomes, okay, I have 3 boxes I have to check off. On the street, in the truck, and some sort of voter. And here we'll play a little bit of this.
Cory Booker had everything.
Hard of hearing could possibly forget. In Newark, only the hard of hearing could possibly forget to vote. It's a political tradition here. Plaster the car with posters, strap on your home stereo, and hit the neighborhoods. Some trucks like this one have a recording, others have live talent. I actually ran after this black Ford Econoline van cruising the south ward of Newark. Excuse me for a second. Can I ride along with you?
I'm James Nash, I'm a retired police officer.
I'm just going to stop that there, because this is the advantage to thinking about structure beforehand. If I know that my first part of the structure is just sort of introduction to soundtracks, and I know my second part is in the soundtrack, then I know ahead of time that I need a transition to get into the soundtrack. So even though literally the taxi cab drops me off and this guy is moving down the street and I'm running after him, I know to start rolling. That, you know, I have my tape rolling, I have my microphone out, because I know I'm going to need that transition. And if I just had the stuff in my bag and I jump in the truck and then start rolling, I don't have that transition. So it's just a little, can I get in the truck? But
I am James Nance. I'm a retired police officer here in the city of Newark.
And he's been driving sound trucks for decades. He's almost 80 years old, and you can't buy his services. He has to love a candidate before he'll jerry-rig his sound system.
So I adapted my own type of apparatus to hold the speakers.
Yeah, it looks like you have bungee cords, and I got string wrapped around me here, and sitting in the front seat, yes.
Those are the wires there for going up to the speaker. And then you see, I had to have the contraption so I could speak while my hands are on the wheel.
The thing about a sound truck is that it's not broadcasting per se. It's more amplified conversation. Nance will pick out specific people. He'll tail people riding bikes. He'll yell at residents just peeking out from behind the curtains of their homes.
Hello, this is Jim Nance, retired police officer. Asking you to lend support to my colleague, Chris Minor.
I don't know, they don't look too impressed.
Hey, Jim, if I look at it, something wrong.
But no one complains about the noise. Olivia Doherty even comes out of her beauty shop, Boswell's House of Coiffures.
So at this point, we're sort of transitioning into the third part. You know, I had the sound in case I needed it getting out of the truck. Like, you know, when we stop the truck, I get out of the truck. Just for the sake of time, we're just going to transition to someone's reaction to what we've just experienced.
She says it would be like complaining about fireworks on the 4th of July.
And believe it or not, we look forward to this day.
Why do you look forward to this day?
Liven up the neighborhood.
It would be a very quiet election day if people just handed out literature.
Yes, and we would stay right in the house.
And that's just not going to happen. James Nance can help it. Not that he doesn't have a sensitive side. When he sees a woman pushing a sleeping baby, he backs off the mic. Just a tap.
You make sure that baby votes for Chris Minor, okay?
Robert Smith, NPR News. So, once again, when pressed for time, I might not have gotten the woman from the beauty salon, the House of Food, probably mispronounced. But because I'd set this sort of checklist for myself, like that's how I wanted to feel a conclusion. I just felt like the kind of conclusion I should have. I forced myself. I'm like, I gotta stop people until I get this tape. I knew what I wanted. Back to the hunting metaphor, like I knew my prey, and I was not gonna leave until I got it. So the question comes now, sort of, now you have your structure, like you picked out a structure, and there's lots of other sort of great structures to use that get more and more complicated. This 3-ring one is just the very basic one that I use sometimes. But there are much more complicated storytelling structures that involve, you know, the hero's journey and you know, outsider becomes an insider. The things that as you do this for a while, and maybe some of you just started, you will pack things that work. The important part is not, though, the magic of structure. I can draw all sorts of circles and that sort of thing. And the 3 parts work for me. I think it works for a lot of people. But the important part is to pick the structure first, to have a hypothesis going into it, of just saying, this is the likely way that it will work. Because then you're on the hunt. Then you're on the prowl for knowing if something's going to work or not. You're testing the hypothesis really when you're out there. And you're finding, you know, by the time you come back, you should know your first piece of tape and you should know your last piece of tape. And actually, I should say this, before you go out, you can even pick your first piece of tape, before you know anything about a story. So the first piece of tape is usually an introduction piece of tape. It's usually, you know nothing about the story, listener. Here's a first little piece of tape that introduces you to the scene. And you can do that before you've actually reported the story. You can imagine what it's going to sound like. And this moves me to sort of my second point after structure, which is, which I just call fantasizing about your story. Thinking about the best possible thing that someone could say. When you walk into an interview, when you go into an event, like I will literally dream, I will act it out
like now that I'm at Planet Money, I have these colleagues, and we'll say, well, what if he says this? And you'd be like, I'll say this. He says this. Well, what if he says, like, you are imagining the best possible world. And we can't predict the future, but it will sharpen your ears for the kind of thing you're looking for. Because you've imagined the best possible thing. Like, wouldn't it be crazy? Wouldn't it be crazy if, all of a sudden, his dad called in the middle of this thing, and he'd be like, yeah, and he starts to talk to his dad, he's like, hey dad, is his dad gonna call? Probably not. But if that's the take you want, maybe you think like, hey, you want to call your dad? Or does your dad ever call? When does your dad call? Can I be there when your dad calls? Like there's all sorts of ways that that's your dream tape. I'll play you one of my little pieces of dream tape that shows you how this works. This is when I was working in Seattle. I did a piece on the economics of school lunchrooms. Lunch ladies were disappearing, and everything was getting centralized. And with my editor, we were joking around about the story. It was really joking, this fantasy. And he was like, oh my God, it'd be great if you had students, students like eating the lunch, and they'd be like, ooh, it's that bad. And I'm like, yeah. Or like, what if you had students who were walking you through the lunch line, give you like a tour of the lunch line, like, oh, look at this stuff's gross, look at this. And so we played out what would it sound like, not knowing these students, not knowing what they were actually going to say. But I knew enough that when I got there, I had done all the interviews with the lunch lady, all this sort of stuff. When it came to lunchtime, I knew the fantasy tape in my head. And so I would pick out a student, and I would follow that student to the lunch line. I'd get a bunch of tape, and it didn't match my fantasy, so I went to the next person, and to the next person, and to the next person. And I finally found this woman, ended up putting her in the intro. But you can see that thing I dreamed about, that active motion, momentum, movement tape, she gives it to us.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Robert Siegel.
And I'm John Itzke. Feeling hungry? Here's what's for lunch at Roosevelt High School in Seattle.
We got some really good food right here. We got a really nice bread and some carrot and some white thing right here on the right. We got some apple. We got some cookies. What is this, man? Turkey what? Oh, this is some turkey fettuccine, whatever that is,
What Yediz Casa is trying to describe is turkey tetrazzini, cheesy mixture of noodles and turkey. It's a classic on school lunch menus. And
now I was actually very lucky here because, maybe not lucky, prepared, because I had followed the making of the turkey tetrazzini. Like all my tape was referring to the turkey tetrazzini, and I had the recipe for the turkey tetrazzini, and in fact, you can hear, let me see if, a little bit of the intro.
Before a tiny woman ordered tetrazzini, before it was slaughtered
of the lunch plate.
So I started out like this.
Let's peel back the layers of turkey tetrazzini. Thursday. Before it was separated and packed for distribution on Wednesday.
This is what it looks like. It's turkey and noodles.
Before a tiny woman with arms of steel mixed in the cheese on Tuesday.
So I was well prepared for this. And I knew, of course, I would love someone to refer to this, and that was my dream tape, and she did it. And there's no real magic to that except being prepared and asking the right questions, asking the questions that will yield the kind of tape that you want. I'm going to give just a few more examples of the ways in which you can plan, because a lot of times people will be like, well, listen, this all works fine and well if you're out on the streets and you have the soundtrack, you can get in the sound trucks, or you can go to the back of the theater. If you can create a sense of movement because you're a field reporter, but sometimes you're trapped. I mean, sometimes you're in one place. Like, how are you segmenting this? How are you telling something as a story? Or maybe you've got a press conference where nothing really happens in the press conference. And this is when you can sort of really think out and plan the way stories work. Because every story, you know, if you go back to sort of the classic Joseph Campbell and Theory of Myth, has this like grand story thing, right? You've got your character, your hero is living a normal life, but all is not well. They need something in their lives, right? Something goes wrong, and they go on this mythic journey. And you know, whether it's Star Wars or Die Hard, whatever it is, they encounter the bad guys. They learn how to use the tools. They find what they're looking for, the Holy Grail, you know, the Death Star, and they conquer their fears and they return back to the normal world. Heroes, having learned something. This is the classic storytelling formula of all time. But you think, like, how does that apply to news, right? We're so rarely given heroes encountering these things. But I found that a lot of times for stories, you can think about the stories in that way. You can think about people who are characters who are living normal lives where something goes wrong. I mean, that sounds like news, right? Tornado hits. All of a sudden the tornado hits and you're in a different world. You know, a world of high stakes, a world where everything matters. Stories that are good news stories, where someone finds the cure for a disease, or they pass a bill. Minor good news, right? But they pass a bill, but they're sort of the heroes that have returned. At some point in their story, something was wrong. They set out to solve something that was wrong with the world or with science, or it was a mystery, and they solved it. The problem is, as reporters, especially on a deadline, you're getting such a narrow slice of the world. You're only there for one part of the story, and your job is to think about what is the bigger story there. If you only get to see them for a moment, where are they in this story? Have they just begun their journey, or have they finished their journey? Have they found the Holy Grail? You know, I mean, rather than tell this epic story of the Holy Grail, you're the guy at the press conference going, well, you know, we got the Grail. It's awesome. And you would just lead with it. You'd be like, yeah, you know, Knights of the Round Table today reported that they got the Grail, and they held it out, and they showed it to it, rather than tell it as a story, you know, as these guys who, you know, had this mission, and King Arthur, and I don't actually know the story of the Holy Grail. But I'm going to play you just two examples of reporters who realized where they were in the story. The first one's from Gregory Warner, who is our reporter in East Africa now, but he used to work for Marketplace, and he covered health policy, which is the worst. It is a tough thing to cover. And he wanted to do a story about billing codes, about medical billing codes. Yeah. And so he went to, I'm going to spoil the end, he went to the Billing Code Convention. And I think, like many of us doing this story, the way we would have done the story is like, all right, Robert's going to the Billing Code Convention. And you're like, oh, billing codes. What's up with them? Here at the Billing Code Convention, a lot of people have a lot of things to say about billing codes, and you know, maybe it'd be funny and be like, seems a little boring, but no, it's really important. Gregory is smarter than I am, and so he realized that the convention was not the beginning of the story, that the convention was the end of the story. Let me show you how we did this.
Larry Raybon is a urologist in Florence, South Carolina. And like every doctor, he charges by procedure. Taking out a tumor, there's a code for that. Using a special scope to do it, that's a different code. If the patient's obese, the surgery is harder, that's another code. If the surgery wasn't scheduled or there was a post-operative infection, you get the idea.
There's a code for these things, and so that's huge amounts of funds that were just sitting on the table that we're not being charged for.
2 years ago, Larry Raybon decided to do things differently. He was going to find every code that he was missing and build for that. To take on this task, he assembled a very loyal team, and here they are.
Dr. Raven is my husband and my boss.
Geneva Raybon, head nurse, and her daughter.
My name is Lauren, I'm in billing.
And son-in-law.
I'm the office manager.
And another daughter.
Yeah, my name is Rainey Raven.
Well, my business has developed into a family affair.
And a family vacation for the Raybons means packing up the Suburban and driving down to Orlando, Florida, not to Disney World, but to a hotel right across the street from Disney, to attend the annual Billing and Coding Conference, known as Coding Con.
Good. You have fun last night?
So nice. Now remember, he met this doctor at the conference. It's not like Gregory Warner followed this guy for 6 months as he come to the realization, like got in the van with him and went down to the conference. He met him at the conference and he was asking like, why are you here? And the guy said, oh, I have my family. And Gregory thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, that's cool. And asked him the normal question, well, how did you get here? Why did you get here? And he was smart enough to see that this is basically that epic story I talked about in miniature, right? You have a doctor, he has a normal life, doing things doctors do, but he all of a sudden has a problem. He realizes that he's losing money because he's not doing the right billing. And so he sets out on a sort of an adventure. He gathers his family together, they start to look for all the billing codes, they actually go on a journey, they get in a van, and they go someplace. And so now, the billing conference actually means something to the doctor. We would have just made fun of it, the billing conference. But by recognizing that it's the end of a journey, this guy's here to find his holy grail, which is the way he can make more money by billing. It's not as epic as the most epic stories, but it's completely entertaining, and it keeps you going by thinking about what a conference is. And it really opened my eyes because you're right, people are excited. Like, for a lot of people, like, the conference is the end of a lot of achievement, right? I'm going to play one more epic story. This one's a very short one, it was done in one day. And this one solves the problem in a different way. This is from Bob Moon, another reporter from Marketplace. And Bob Moon had a really bad assignment. He had to cover a press conference, and it turns out it wasn't even a press conference, it was a photo op. There was the person he was assigned to do the story on didn't say a word. And so, Bob Moon did something which you can do rarely, but it's kind of nice when you do. Those of you who heard my Planet Money speech earlier heard us do this in various forums, but Bob Moon turned it into a mystery. And so the character was himself. All of a sudden, he was the epic hero confronting a mystery that he has to solve. And the mystery involved Russian President Vladimir Putin.
When a public relations agency told us to show up at a West Side gas station at noon today, we wanted to meet the president of Russia, how could you resist? And sure enough, a navy blue limousine pulls up and out steps Vladimir Putin. What was he doing there? He must not have needed gas. The limo stopped in the driveway. He was quickly ushered inside, and we pressed our noses to the window.
He went to the men's room.
Not the men's room, really. That photographer was just joking. Actually, the Russian leader was grabbing coffee and a donut.
He's got a Krispy Kreme donut. He's got a Krispy Kreme donut.
New York Senator Charles Schumer confirmed it.
When I showed the president of Russia a Krispy Kreme donut, and he ate it and said it was good, that was one of the more surreal moments that I've had in politics.
Who could doubt that? But let's get down to business. Putin was really there helping launch 1,300 new Lukoil gasoline stations, which a Russian oil firm bought from Getty Petroleum. Putin didn't speak, but Schumer was more than happy to offer his thanks. New oil from Russia, he says, can only help give OPEC a run for the money. At a gas station in New York, I'm Bob Moon for Marketplace.
Okay, it's not quite the Death Star or the Holy Grail, the Lukoil gas station, but at the same time, he took what is a difficult story and he made it fun. And he made it into what was actually a story, what I talked about earlier. There was action there, you know? A mystery is posed. What was he doing here? And was it this? No. Was it this? No. It turned out to be this. And even though it's the world's tiniest little story, and even though the end is you're just like, yeah, okay, they opened a gas station. We are sucked in when we hear movement, when we hear stories where something actually happens. We're in fact so starved for it. So many of our pieces that we do are you know, this person says this, and this person thinks this, and this person thinks this, where there's nothing actually happening, you know, where there's no actual movement, where the piece sounds the same from the beginning to the end. That even the littlest mystery solved is pretty pleasant. Like, that's a pleasant story to listen to, and you actually listen to the end. Or even something on billing codes will keep you going. Or, you know, even something that you may not care about, you know, if it's divided up, if you have 3-part structure where you actually start in one place and end in another place and go on this little journey, it feels a little bit satisfying. And I guess to sort of sum it up, it's just when you have so little time, you're tempted to not do this part. You're tempted to like get on the phone immediately and start calling because like, what if no one calls you back? What if you can't get to someplace? And that's important. But the stuff we're talking about here are really conceptual ideas that if you take 5-10 minutes, if you take your colleague or your editor and you sit down and do it out loud, and we do this out loud now at Planet Money, we'll just say, what's your first piece of tape? What are you going to start with? Like, what's the coolest thing that could possibly happen? Oh, you should try this. You should say this. You know, you should do this. Try and record that. Plan out the story as much as possible, even if you have 5-10 minutes. And that way, the writing process has begun. And it's going to make your life much easier. And you're going to be able to find things that you would never have been able to find. Because even though Bob Moon does a great job of just sounding really casual, right? I'm just waiting around doing this. If he had gotten back, if he had decided to do this after he had returned, if this was his brilliant idea after he got back to the office, he would have had the tape of the photographer. Like, who records the photographer joking about the bathroom? Or the other reporter is going, I think it's a Krispy Kreme donut. Why was he rolling the whole time with fellow reporters? Because he was already thinking, he was already writing in his head, going, you know, I may need this. Like, if there's going to be no action, I'm going to need the action that I do have. All about that.